So the effects of reinforcement, they're very powerful. Both appropriate behaviors and problem behaviors are strengthened or maintained by reinforcement. What is reinforcement? It's always a consequence. Always a consequence. Follows a display of a behavior. So the impact that reinforcement has on a behavior is that it increases the future frequency or it maintains the behavior that it follows. So again, if a teacher in a setting, if she consistently responds with removing a task every time that individual either threatens her, pulls her hair, scratches her, right? She is providing that individual with reinforcement. We call that negative reinforcement, right? Because she's removing a variable from his environment. She says, nope, he needs a break, so I'm going to remove this task from him. He's not ready to start on his work. And I'm just like, okay. He doesn't have, for me, I would say he doesn't have the skills to protest appropriately, right? To ask, hey, can I take a break first before I get started on that? Or is there an alternate, requesting an alternate assignment instead of that one? Or maybe even asking for help? Have you looked first to see if he has those skills instead of reinforcing that problem behavior by removing that task? I mean, I understand it's unpleasant that he scratched you, pulled your hair, or threatened you, but be very careful with that because you're maintaining the value of that problem behavior for that individual. He's contacting escape if the function for his problem behavior is escape. He's contacting it, and it's effective. That's why I'm like, we have to be very mindful of how are we responding to problem behavior. And like I said, reinforcement occurs as a consequence. So here's positive reinforcement, right? This is like acts, especially with the attention and tangible functions. This is what it looks like when they're engaging in problem behavior and what that reinforcement looks like, right? So if it's a tangible or attention function, the reinforcement can be access to attention, even if it is lectures. Even if it is an increased amount of redirection, right? You know, stop that, we don't do that, don't hit him, we don't hit. And I hear a lot of that, and I'm like, whoa, that's a lot of attending. That's a lot of attention to the problem behavior, right? Or objects or activities. Sometimes I'll hear too, right? He's tantruming and rolling all over the floor. Just give him the puzzle. And I'm like, ooh, just gained access to that tangible. And that problem behavior has maintained value, right? So, and again, you'll see here, now the big difference between the two here, so you'll see negative reinforcement, right? And negative reinforcement occurs with the problem behaviors that have an escape function, right? So with negative reinforcement, the difference between the two, with positive and negative reinforcement, again, this is just an easy analogy that I try because a lot of people get them confused. A lot of people tend to pair negative reinforcement like with a negative consequence, like punishment, where the effect of punishment is a decrease in problem behavior, right? Whereas reinforcement is an increase. And that's why even with negative reinforcement, it doesn't fit that definition. So it's not punishment. It still reinforces that problem behavior because it either maintains the value of that problem behavior or it increases the value of that problem behavior. And I'm going to give you the quick example that hopefully will make sense because they both increase problem behavior. But the difference is with positive reinforcement, think of like a bank account or like our environment, right? My little bubble here. With positive reinforcement, it's the insertion of a stimulus or a variable into my environment that I want. It's a positive stimulus, a positive variable. I want it in my environment. If I don't have the appropriate skills to acquire it, I'll default, if the function of my problem behavior is attention or tangible, I will default to my problem behavior to gain access to those variables that I want in my environment, right? That's why I call it like a deposit into my environment, right? Either I want attention, I want that in my environment, or I want access to a specific item. That's an item I want in my environment. I want to add it to my environment or deposit it into my environment. If it's an activity, even if it's like going outside for a walk or a playground, I want that in my environment, right? And we engage, our own behaviors have functions too, right? Even our appropriate behaviors, we engage in them to acquire these variables to get put or inserted into our environment. The difference with negative reinforcement is the removal of those variables from our environment. right? I want work demands out of my environment. I want transitions to not occur. I want them removed from my environment. I want unstructured periods removed from my environment. So these are, I want a withdrawal of a specific variable, right, or stimulus out of my environment. That's the difference between the two. One is a deposit and the other one is a withdrawal. But the reason why they both meet the criteria for reinforcement is they both increase the value of the problem behavior. Does that make sense? Now, hopefully you can see, because a lot of people get those two confused. Even when even with the staff that I work with, and we're working with individuals with severe problem behaviors, and it scares me sometimes that they have a hard time defining these two, and they assume that the negative reinforcement's a punishment. And I'm like, no. They're still contacting reinforcement. It's just different because they want either the withdrawal of something or the delay of something that they find aversive, right? I'm going to engage in all this problem behavior because right now we're making a transition to the library and I don't like going. I don't like going there, right? So I may not get out of it completely, but I can delay that process, that transition from occurring by engaging in all this problem behavior. So instead of me being in that library for 50 minutes, now I'm only going to be in there for 35. Because I've been kicking and screaming here, delaying that process, right? Because that's a variable they don't want in their environment, but they're still contacting reinforcement because guess what? They're not there. Does that make sense? And that's why it still makes that problem behavior very powerful and valuable for that person. So you'll see here, this is just an example of a graph because we graph all of our work, but when you are, once you have identified the function of a problem behavior for an individual and you develop your interventions that are specific to that function, and those interventions target both the reduction of the problem behavior, but also the skill acquisition of the replacement behaviors, one of the things that we do, because remember I said you're going to be applying reinforcement in both of those conditions, right? To the problem behavior, you're going to alter how you are responding to that person, but when you're teaching the replacement behaviors, you're also going to be responding, utilizing reinforcement. But the conditions in which you use the reinforcement in both of those situations are going to be different. So one of the things with problem behavior, we're going to minimize the reinforcement significantly. If we can remove it completely, we're going to do that too. And one of the things you'll see here is when, this is just showing you a graph here. This is baseline. This is showing you the high occurrence of behaviors, right? This is the length of time screaming is occurring in minutes, and that's between 6 and 7 minutes, right? This individual is engaging in screaming behavior, and you have 5 data points there to show that's where this individual is engaging in problem behavior. So then we say, let's go ahead and start utilizing the extinction procedure. We're going to remove the reinforcing variable, right? So let's say, for example, the removal, we were removing the task demand every time he started engaging in screaming. And so now we're saying we're not going to do that. And I'll get those shock looks too, we're going to stay right there near him? I'm like, He's going to be scratching me. And I'm like, I know. Wear some hoodies, long sleeves. If you can, get those kinds that wrap around your thumb so that it stays, on you so that when he is starting to scratch. But remember, we're going to be teaching, intensive teaching, right? We're going to teach him that his scratching is no longer going to be effective for communicating to us his protest for that work assignment. So we're going to teach him and provide him the supports in that condition, in the presence of that antecedent variable, right? The presentation of a task. We're going to start teaching him, all you got to say is, I need a break. I'll give him the words for the functional communication response that I'll reinforce. I'm going to put that problem behavior on extinction because I'm not going to give him escape. But I know that his motivation right now is escape. But he does not have the skills to request it appropriately. So I'm going to give it to him. The moment he starts scratching, do you think that I'm going to say anything to his scratching of me? Absolutely not. I already know what the function is. He's engaging in these problem behaviors for escape. The antecedent variable is very significant. I mean, it's already clear, right? We present the task, he starts scratching. So I'm going to say, all you got to do is say, I need a break. As soon as he does, do you think that we give it to him right away? Yes. Remember, reinforcement. I want to see more of the appropriate functional communication response than I do the communication that he's getting or communicating with this problem behavior, right? We're doing two things at one time. I'm working on reducing the problem behavior, but increasing the replacement behavior, which is functional communication, right? So he needs immediate reinforcement there, but he's also not going to get the reinforcement that his problem behaviors had a history of with scratching me. Does that make sense now? Okay, so I'll give you one quick story that I got to the other day, and it just, it was one of those that I just, a kid in a BMC unit, a behavior management class, he was in crisis. Fortunately, it was just verbal. So he was yelling, cursing. He was threatening to physically harm the staff, but he was communicating to everyone. But more specifically, he was communicating to the teacher, cursing at her to get out of the classroom. And she wouldn't leave. And so this is prior to him, prior to the escalation of his yelling, right? And I'm like, ooh, I know the cursing is hard and offensive sometimes, but I'm like, he used his words to place a request, right, for you. And I know he didn't say, please leave, Miss Jones. I know he didn't say that. But if you remove all the offending words and just get down to the core, he was placing a request using his words for you to please leave the environment. I learned that he had placed that request multiple times, mind you, with a lot of offending words, cursing, and that it continued to escalate with his yelling and, of course, his threats to harm her. And still, he contacted Extinction. He didn't get the reinforcement that he was looking for, right? And he was looking for what? Positive or negative reinforcement? Negative, right? He wanted the removal of that teacher from his environment. So he's escalating now, and it's more, the escalation is just in his volume, but also his threats, and he's contacting Extinction, not contacting the reinforcement that he's looking for. And it's escalating till he picks up an object and he throws it at her, busting open her brow where she required stitches. And that's hard to hear, right? Because none of us want to get hurt when we're committed to working with these individuals. But at the same time, when I'm evaluating a situation like that, I'm like, and then what do you think she did once she got struck? She removed herself from the environment. And I'm just like, you placed his appropriate requests on Extinction, but you reinforced his problematic behavior. Completely backwards. We can clean up the cursing and the threats to harm over time, right? Because we want to reinforce his functional communication. If he's using his words to communicate with you, give him that contact with that reinforcement. We'll work on him tolerating the presence of that teacher and whatever's going on in that relationship between the two. But we don't ever want to create a situation that we're putting appropriate behaviors, especially functional communication, on Extinction, removing access to reinforcement, and then waiting till they escalate so much that we end up reinforcing that problem behavior. Because all we do is add value and effectiveness to him defaulting to that problem behavior. So it was very disheartening for me to hear, I don't want anybody to get hurt, but at the same time, how are we teaching these individuals that them engaging in those appropriate responses has value in our environment, especially using functional communication, and we're not giving it to them? Those are not the behaviors we put on Extinction. It's the problem behaviors we do, but we don't put those very behaviors that we want to see more of, we don't put those on Extinction. And that's how, hopefully that made sense in the example I gave you with the student, how you do both. Because you're employing reinforcement in both of those situations, right? Because I'm going to remove it for the presence of problem behavior, but I'm going to make it available as soon as he gives me that appropriate response, the replacement behavior that I want to see more of.